Today's guest is Mike Harris. We're going to discuss the power of coaching and how it can change your life. Welcome to Richer Soul, Life Beyond Money, the last baby step. Imagine it's 12 months from now. You've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? What's it like to have great relationships? Friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money? To be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time. Your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. I help people live the life of their dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. You can learn how by listening to the framework in episodes 1 through 9. It's simpler than you can imagine. You can also hear actual coaching calls by looking under the coaching call tab on richersoul.com. You'll also find all the show notes for this episode there, and there's a link in this episode. I send out a monthly email, and you can sign up while you're there. In the monthly email, I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. I also share the most interesting articles I read on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. Today, let's focus on time. I want to start with an African proverb. Westerners own watches, Africans own time. How would your life be different if you owned time? I'm going to read you a passage, and afterwards, I will tell you where it came from. Stay away from most popular entertainment. Most of what passes for legitimate entertainment is inferior or foolish, and only caters to or exploits people's weaknesses. Avoid being one of the mob who indulges in such pastimes. Your life is too short and you have important things to do. Be discriminating about what images and ideas you permit into your mind. If you yourself don't choose what thoughts and images you expose yourself to, someone else will. Their motives may not be the highest. It is the easiest thing in the world to slide imperceptibly into vulgarity. But there's no need for that to happen if you determine not to waste your time and attention on mindless pap. Okay, this is a passage from Epictetus, 2,000 years ago. Can you imagine if this was a big problem back then, how much more of a problem it is today with so many distractions to eat away at your time? It's time to control and own your time, instead of letting someone else do that. So, let's meet today's guest, Mike Harris, who takes leaders and creators on a journey of self-discovery and cultivation that amplifies the results they're creating in their work, business, relationships, and mission. Through a process that's part deep inquiry, part loving yet confronting dialogue, and part cartography, they create the world they desire from the inside out. Mike's clients share missions that are close to their hearts and drive to create a lasting impact in the world. Let's meet Mike. Welcome to Richer Soul, Mike. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you for having me, Rocky. Great to be here.
Honor's all mine. So let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Ooh, the short answer would be not a whole lot. I grew up in a town called Willingboro, New Jersey. It was sort of a hard scrabble town. It got beat up in the 70s when there was the recession and a lot of manufacturing jobs went away. And there was this sense of being beaten down in the town, and my family was not immune to that. And money was something we really didn't talk about very much. We talked about how bad our luck was, and that extended to money. But my parents weren't very open about money, about what to do when you have money. It was just that we went through the motions and spent money as it came in. And usually there was enough left for a vacation somewhere at some point during the year. Somewhere in me, I always felt like there was something more, and there was a big struggle there. It took me a long time to reconcile that. It was the joke in the family was that if I wanted to spend $5 more on something, the joke was that, Mike, you've got champagne taste and mom and dad have beer wallets. So what I learned about it was that it was something that you don't talk about, and there wasn't really a lot of it to go around, and you didn't have much control over what you have.
Did that cause a scarcity mindset? Because it sounds like you had an abundance mindset in the sense that you had the champagne taste, but you were stuck in a group of people who didn't have the money to handle that.
Yeah, I don't want to say that it caused a scarcity mindset, because even from the first job I worked, I remember that wanted more money, I would just work more. I would work more hours. I would work overtime. I would find a second job. I always had the sense that there was more. There was more to be had, and I was going to find a way to create that for myself. And at some points, I've had to struggle against it. I see where that shows up in my life. It doesn't necessarily show up in the sense of being able to create wealth, but I've noticed that it does show up in the sense of, as I've confronted this belief that I had that money came from somewhere other than me.
So what does that mean?
What that means is that money isn't the product of my own creativity and the energy that I put into mastering a craft or a vocation or a skill. It's something that occurs in a transaction, in a trade-off, and the money comes from the other side of that transaction. It's the difference between being a commodity and creating something of great value. In the working world, your time can be a commodity until you've developed a skill that's invaluable, that makes you difficult to replace or even irreplaceable in an organization. And the same goes for being an entrepreneur. If you have a unique skill or a unique set of skills, you become highly valuable. Whereas if you don't develop those skills and you're simply doing something run-of-the-mill and attempting to do whatever anyone else at one of the lower common denominators are doing, you're not going to reap that value. You're simply going to become a commodity in what you do.
And that's very true. I mean, I think companies do their best to force you to become a commodity so that they can easily replace you and so that they can also control you. In the marketplace, depending on what the particular offering is, a lot of times things are, in a sense, a commodity, and you have to distinguish yourself and make yourself more valuable than just another widget out there.
Absolutely, yes.
So what do you think gave you the drive to take that step to say, I want to work harder so I can have more?
That's a great question. I think that inherently I understood that there was something that felt wrong to me about that mindset, and I wanted to move away from it. And I mean that in the physical sense. I wanted to separate myself from the people who were bringing that mindset into my world and who insisted that there was no other way. As a young man, I'd always envisioned myself moving somewhere other than where I lived. And for a very brief time, I did move away from the area and came back shortly thereafter. And that was a big blow to me in that way, that actually had me questioning the abundance mindset. It's, wow, like I had this big setback. What am I supposed to do now? I'd ignored the idea that I could possibly be inherently resilient.
So how did you overcome it?
It took years. It was back in 2003, and there was a lot of tumultuousness in my life at that time. We'll just throw that blanket over what was going on. I was dealing with significant anxiety and depression and feeling a lack of purpose in my life. When I came home, I thought, wow, is this all there is? I fell deeper and deeper into that hole. And it took finding some good people around me, surrounding myself with people who saw the world similarly to me, who were willing to support me when I was down, who were willing to say, hey, like, we see where you're coming from and we want to be there to help you however we can. Over years of being around folks like that and taking the risks that I needed to take, risk has always been a transformative thing for me. And a year after coming home, I went from waiting tables and working in bars to being a pro poker player and being able to play that game at a high level, knowing that I relied only on myself, only on my own funds, and only on my own wit and skills. I was able to start to move past the experience from a year before.
Okay, and that's an interesting choice. And I heard a lot of good things about playing poker from the standpoint of being able to read people, being able to make mathematical calculations, and being able to kind of be unemotionally involved in the choices that you have to make. But yet there are a ton of emotions going on all around you. What was your experience with that whole high level of poker playing?
I came in during the poker boom of 2003 through 2005. It was really this wonderful Wild West sort of environment where there was this gold rush in poker. And I played mostly online. I would say about the first year, I played mostly online. And I became deeply grounded in the mathematical part of the game. And it's a sort of a hybrid of knowing the basic statistics, and I would call it intuition statistics, where you're gauging what sort of hand an opponent might have, narrowing it down to a range, and from there, gauging what your chances are of being able to win the hand and whether or not you should be in the hand at all. That was a really profound skill to learn because it married the intuitive, the being able to read people and paying attention to their patterns, the way they play the game, and how they might react to winning or losing a hand with you. It married that to the pure mathematical side of the game, which was really difficult to learn in the beginning. And then once those two came together, it seemed to almost create a daily flow state for me in the game.
It takes time to learn that, but if you have the skills to get good at it, I'm assuming that there is a lot of money to be made.
Yeah, I will say that was a very good living. The one downside is that when there is that kind of money in play, people get really emotional and sometimes a little unhinged. And online, it's magnified. When you're hiding behind a screen, you'll say whatever comes up without any second thought of what retribution could possibly be, because there is none. And Rocky, I mean, you've sat in a men's group with me for a year and a half now. You know that I am no stranger to foul language, and people in these online poker rooms said things to me that made my skin crawl. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And playing the game in person, it was a lot more toned down. It was a little more amicable. And yet you're also seeing the face of the person from whom you're winning money. It draws in the element of compassion and empathy for another person's situation. And there were nights where I really struggled with the idea that there was a guy at my table who had a problem with gambling and didn't know when to stop. I could see how that was hurting him and that was hurting me.
Are you winning from him or are you winning from the house? And he's losing to the house, or is it you against him?
In poker, you are winning from other players. You're winning from the other participants in the game. So your edge is based on your combination of skill and luck in relation to theirs.
Okay. So what happened?
In the end, I chose to be a grown-up and go get a 9-to-5 job. Between the compassion and empathy, the abuse online, I was feeling stressed out, a little burned out. And at the end of 2005, I had a brief losing streak that, from a dollars and cents perspective, did not really mean anything. But I took it really hard. And I didn't want to go forward in my life feeling that kind of stress on a regular basis. I went into the wonderful world of finance. And I spent 12 years doing that, working for companies like Toronto Dominion and PwC.
And how was that?
Those two companies were very different animals, I will say that, in that Toronto Dominion, which is a commercial bank, they are, for lack of a better way of saying it, they are a bank that grows by acquiring other banks only. And so there were, more than anything, it was a political environment because you have people constantly jockeying for survival. And there's no better place on earth to learn about human nature than seeing people in that sort of pressure cooker fighting for their careers every single day. I never imagined that my first real 9 to 5 would be so Machiavellian in nature, but that's what it was. And my good luck was that the VP that I reported to, he was a politician in real life and was at least thinking that way. So I kind of learned the ropes of that from him, and he was able to guide me away from peril a few times that would have landed me on the street.
So when you say he guided you, what does that look like?
I might come into his office and say, I'm going to reach out to this person on this issue. We did a lot of the issues that he and I would work on together were related to office space, and office space was a very political thing there. Office space was the indicator that your department was growing or shrinking, or it could be indicative of whether you as a senior vice president or a vice president were important to the company, or whether you were just another face in the crowd. And I might come to him and say, hey, I want to talk to this person about this issue. And there were a few times where he steered me clear of what was becoming a political pissing match, for lack of a better way of saying it. That would have been a place where I could have stuck my nose into a disagreement between two people who were higher up in the company and gotten myself in a lot of hot water.
The joys of working in corporate.
Yeah, indeed. And PwC, on the other hand, was the most professional place I ever could have imagined working. Everyone was extraordinarily polite, even to the point where I wondered how much people were holding back. But at the same time, it was a great and grueling experience. We worked long hours on engagements for our clients. I worked audit engagements for insurance companies and the credit card arms of some of the big banks. And what I took away from that experience, sort of being able to communicate in a way that's still present, but not political. It's being charismatic and influential, and at the same time doing it in service of your team and your client rather than simply being of service to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if you serve yourself, you're going to end up kind of like your first company.
Yeah.
Which is not a good atmosphere. And I think sometimes people don't realize when you serve the greater good, as they say, all boats rise in a rising tide. And so all of you can do better if you work together versus if you fight against each other. Unfortunately. And I guess, every corporation has their own culture in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've seen it in my time there, communication is always the great hurdle. It's that we know what we want to say, and we don't necessarily know how to say it in a way that's going to be received well by the other person.
So how do you fix that? How do you deal with that?
Well, there are a few ways. One is that there are infinite resources out there with respect to communicating clearly, especially in that sort of setting. In 2014, I attended a masterclass with a company called Own the Room that's based out of northern New Jersey. And some of their very best material revolves around sales and client conversations, and also managing meetings, especially when some of the participants are disruptive. That's one way. The way that I tend to gravitate towards as a foundation, using what I learned at Own the Room as a series of tools, that foundation is simply slowing down and getting clear and getting really intentional about what you want about what the other party wants and how you can meet. And that means more questions and less answers. So if, say, for example, Rocky, you and I were having a conversation about an audit engagement or something like that, where you weren't sure why I needed a certain piece of information, that's the sort of thing that becomes confrontational very quickly in an environment like PwC, where the client thinks that we would be pushing their buttons. And here we're just trying to do a good job and sort of cover our butts with our own regulators. So we could explain that and they might grumble. Or we could say, hey, like, is there something about this that we've already requested? How can we do this in a way that's less of a burden on you? And start from a place of that, start from a place of really honest to goodness serving them and getting clear on what they need. I don't know what kind of day the person on the other side of the desk has had. I don't know what kind of day you're having. But if I know, it creates a lot of context through which we can have a more honest and open conversation.
You know, the key here and the thing that kind of sticks out for me is that you're listening to and looking at their point of view and looking at it from their side of the table, which I think so often we don't do.
Yeah. And it's such an easy thing to overlook because we have our own set of needs to look after, and it becomes almost robotic in a way. If you're navigating through a busy, hectic day and you're not really dialed into what's going on around you, that's the best time to slow down. When you recognize that you're not dialed into what's going on around you and you are only thinking about your own needs, that is the best time to slow down and see how you can drop back into service.
That's very interesting. You know, I've heard of Own the Room, and for some reason, I thought it was more about learning to speak publicly, but it sounds like it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, their curriculum is vast, and the public speaking portion of their program is fantastic, by the way. It was absolutely transformative for me, not just from the perspective of getting up in front of a room and speaking, but for my confidence in general.
And that's the thing, you know, constantly finding ways to improve yourself and to build confidence and to sharpen your saw is an important thing to do. And you constantly have to find ways to make yourself better.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
In 2015, I was physically run down from the long work weeks at PwC, and I found coaching. So you and I, Rocky, we were in the same program of Vermeet Sethi's. It was called Vermeet's Brain Trust, RBT. And there was a guy who used to be in the group. He was in there for a few months. His name was Rich Litvin. And he made a few posts in the group. And there was something that was really intriguing to me about the way he wrote, about the intention that was coming out from behind it. He was so clear on who he was and what he wanted and what he was creating in the world. And he never tried to sell anything in the group, never even so much as tried to reach out and get people to have conversations with him. I was fascinated. I had to look him up. I found out he wrote this book called The Prosperous Coach. I bought it. I read it in about 3 hours. I read it. I devoured that thing and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked just on the way of being behind coaching. That here as a coach, I was able to create this space where people who are feeling stuck or people who want to create more or people who are at a crossroads in their career and have a big decision to make, here's a space where they can just let everything out and work whatever they're going through, work that out from within. That, to me, sounded like a dream job. So I did what any logical human being would do. I found people to start having these types of conversations with. No training, no nothing. I just reached out and said, hey, I have 2 ears and I'd like to help you. At the end of 2015, I think, I was starting to have these conversations regularly, and they were fascinating. And what was fascinating was that people just wanted to be heard. People just wanted to feel heard, and sometimes a little advice was in order or a probing question was in order. And that was really all I had at the time. I still had no meaningful training as a coach. And yet these people felt profoundly served by our conversation. And that brought me in for life.
It's funny what happens when you listen to people.
Isn't it though?
It is. As a matter of fact, I remember reading a book, and I think the book was about building relationships. And they literally said that if you have a conversation with somebody, and let's say it's an hour long, and you talk for 5 minutes and they talk for 55 minutes, it creates an amazing relationship because you're actually letting them speak and giving them the space to do so. And they think you're the smartest person in the world for some reason. Yeah. It's funny how we humans are.
Has that been your experience in coaching as well, Rocky?
I think so. My coaching's a little bit different. I do coaching on two parts. So one part is coaching to help you find your place. And then my second part of coaching is kind of teaching / I'm not going to say calling out. I'm going to say looking for risks and inconsistencies. So helping people to say, this is the decision I want to make, and then making sure that it truly is the decision that they want to make, and they've thought all the way through to the end game, and they've looked at the pluses and minuses, and it fits in with what they say their goals are. Because I see a lot of inconsistencies. People say they want X, but they haven't explored it, or they don't really understand what X is. And so I kind of do both sides of, a lot of coaches don't give that second side, and that's where I think I'm unique. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I do see a lot of one-sided coaching that does not really fill in those gaps. And I caught on to that pretty early on with a couple of coaches I worked with where, we weren't really filling in that disparity between what I was saying I wanted and what I was actually doing. We weren't getting into that at all. It was just rehashing the same conversation over and over again. Nothing really seemed to change. And that was what I was craving. All right. It's when you make that investment, whether it's in coaching or in a course or in a system, it's the change that you really want. That's the value.
So how do you get people to change?
There are a lot of different ways. Full disclosure, I can't get someone to change. Someone has to be fully open to changing in order for me to be able to help them to change. But I liken myself to a guy with a flashlight. I'm not the person who's, if you're standing in a pit, I'm not throwing a rope down and pulling you up. I'm standing in the pit with you, and I'll just flick my flashlight on, point to the corner and say, hey, do you want to take the stairs up? We make things very complicated when it comes to change. And oftentimes there is a trade-off, right? Change is uncomfortable. We have to do things in a different way, and sometimes we're afraid that we're going to become a different person as a result of that. So there's something that's inherently uncomfortable about the process and the idea of change. And the trade-off is against the discomfort of the life that we are currently living. That thing in our life that we want to change. Which is more uncomfortable? Which one are we more willing to live with right now? How I address that is through commitment, right? Commitment is typically what's missing. Like if, say, for example, Rocky, I come to you and I have financial habits I want to change, and after 2 months I haven't done anything, it would be the obvious question that comes up for me there is, okay, well, I'm not committed to that. What am I more committed to? And sometimes simply illuminating that there is still a commitment there. There's a commitment to maintaining the status quo, to upholding this identity that comes along with the issues in your life that you say you want to change. Sometimes pointing that out is enough. Sometimes we need to go a step further and demonstrate how that happens. So we create challenges. So I will create a challenge to get someone into action, doing something that's outside of their comfort zone. They say they want to do, but aren't doing it. So there's a limited type of accountability that occurs with that because I can't stand next to them necessarily while they're doing it. But creating that challenge and holding their feet to the fire on whether or not they follow through, whether they keep their word, is really powerful for people. So once someone sees that, oh, well, you know what? I did do this thing. I was afraid to call 5 prospects today, and then I called 5 and it was so easy I called another 5. Sometimes the change is something like that. And a few times I've done it through something physical, where I've taken clients on challenging hikes or other types of physical challenges like that, where we are creating a physical embodiment of the struggle that they're working with. Do you want to hear an example of one of those?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. About a week and a half ago, I had a client in town, and she is an avid hiker. We had done a leg of the Appalachian Trail earlier this year. This time we were going to do a challenging trail in northern Jersey. Well, we were both ill for a couple weeks beforehand, and we went to Plan B. Plan B was there was a state park on the southern border of Jersey near Delaware, and it was going to be a longer hike. It was going to be about 8 to 10 miles, but flatter, physically less challenging, and importantly, close to home, so we didn't have the extra few hours on the road that would sap us of more energy than we were already expending. So a mile into this hike, I get my leg caught in a mini sinkhole up to about 3 inches above my knee. I did not know these things existed in Jersey, by the way. I mean, this is like a sandy, gravelly trail. We hit a muddy patch, and next thing I know, I'm knee deep in mud and swamp water, and I'm having trouble getting out. And I didn't think of it at the time, but this was the perfect opportunity to model something that we had talked about the night before. We talked about the idea of resilience. So she had this idea that there were certain things that she could not come back from. And by the way, Rocky, this woman is tough as nails. She is a complete badass in business, has been a financial executive for many, many years, and she thinks she's not resilient. So here I'm knee deep and I've no idea what to do. So I just reach up my hand and I'm like, help? I couldn't quite get myself out on my own. So she pulled me up. My leg is caked with mud. Like there's all kinds of crap inside my shoe. It's soaking wet, and we have like 7 miles left to go. So there's a part of me that's angry at myself for falling in and being clumsy and looking stupid in front of my client. I mean, I wouldn't even believe that she had that judgment. But in that moment, I was making that story up. And then I started to get really irrational. And I was like, I've ruined my shoes, and now I'm going to have to buy a new pair of shoes. Like, this is the thing I care about when I'm in a sinkhole. And then it was, did I get flesh-eating bacteria on my leg while my leg was in the hole? Did that happen? All these crazy thoughts are going through my mind. And after about a minute or two, letting them do their thing, we got back on the trail. We found a map, we got back on the trail, and we found a washroom. And miracle of miracles, it was one with enough water pressure to wash off my shoe and my sock. And there was an air dryer in there. And the whole time, we kept our cool. We stayed composed. We got everything cleaned up. And about a half an hour, 45 minutes, we're back on the trail like nothing ever happened.
I'm going to say that there is a saying, this too shall pass.
Yeah. And it's funny, though, because you think about the times during the course of a workday where someone makes some backhanded comment to you and it just sets you off. And that takes over, and it can take over an entire afternoon. Or something goes wrong. I make an error on something I'm working on, and someone points it out to me, and I have to go back and fix it. It takes a couple hours, and then I'm really angry at myself, and I spend a lot of time beating myself up. And it creates a lot of unproductive nonsense. And it takes me off the path of creating what it is I'm here to create.
That it does. I think that's the hard thing for everyone, is in that moment to kind of disassociate yourself from it and not put emotional meaning on an event that occurs.
Right. We don't have to be resilient from someone making a comment to us or from falling down or from whatever. The thing we really need to be resilient with is our own thoughts and what we come to believe about what happens and what we believe that means about us.
Correct. And it sounds so easy, and yet it's so difficult.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for people in the moment to deal with that?
When your mind is racing with negativity, imagine that you got a remote in your hand. Press pause and notice what's happening. Notice that you're having the thought and then that you're instantly believing it. Notice your tendency to believe the thought that comes up, regardless of what it is, regardless of how crazy it is, without question, without giving it a second thought. And take a moment and let that sink in, that this is a thought that's gone unquestioned. What question do you want to ask? How can you challenge this thought? I firmly believe that a thought unchallenged is a thought wasted. If a thought does not go challenged, then we could not tell either way whether it holds water or not, whether it's true. And a lot of the times, the thoughts we have, they're just ways of arguing with reality anyway. They're just these stories that we make up to stir up emotions that make us feel alive, right? They stir up anger or sadness or fear or whatever it is that we need to feel that rush of dopamine that comes along with experiencing those emotions. How do you want to challenge that thought? Do you want to believe it? Come from that place. Come from the place of, this is a thought I've created, and I can choose whether or not to take ownership of it.
And we can always take ownership, correct?
We can always take ownership. And we can always take ownership of our choice to release a thought too. To just say, wow, that doesn't make any sense at all. I can be done with that one.
Letting go isn't easy.
It can be a practice. And the thing is there's a question I ask myself every day. Like starting my day, one question I ask myself at the beginning of every day: how do I want to create myself today? Right? How do I want to exercise my own agency to be the man I want to be? That gets me really clear on how I identify myself, with what my identity is going to be. And if there's a thought that comes up that's not consistent with that, that clashes with that, it makes it a lot easier to let it go. If I feel unshakably committed to being that man, letting go of that silly thought gets a lot easier.
That it does. A lot of what you're talking about almost sounds like therapy, but coaching isn't therapy. What do you see as the difference between the two?
I will only speak for my coaching, because I think that there are a lot of coaches whose work may overlap conventional therapy. But what I will say for my own work is the difference is that therapy assumes there's something to be fixed. I don't operate from that place. Things come up and they will provide context and texture for the conversation that we're having. But really what my coaching is about is creating an incubator for your own possibility, whether that's in your career or your business or your relationships or whatever. It's coming from a place of possibility, and that you are already whole rather than that there's something there to be fixed. We take certain qualities of ourselves and we make them wrong, right? I can be temperamental. I go to a therapist to talk about how I have an outburst every once in a long while. And when we take the edge off of that, does it take the edge off of something else where I'm able to fully feel joy or fully feel something else? Maybe it's just a matter of, rather than fixing something, maybe it's a matter of putting oneself in better positions throughout the day, or getting more into joy from a blank slate rather than needing the offset, right? Those things are available. And the one other thing is that my coaching is based on impact, right? that's ultimately the goal, is that rather than stopping a downward spiral, we want to create an upward facing J curve. That's the impact that we're trying to create.
And what are the issues that your clients face as they try to do that?
Oftentimes, some of the limiting beliefs that come up are, I see a lot of clients who have issues with resilience. That is very common, where they don't see where they're inherently resilient, where they're powerful in one part of their life, and then they see an error that causes a social death or something like that as something that they could never conceivably recover from. A lot of clients see themselves as risky investments. And what I mean by that is that they are hesitant to commit to themselves fully in creating whatever they want in their lives. Say, for example, this is a great blanket example because this is so common. It's something ridiculous, like 80% of online courses go unfinished, right?
Yes.
And yet people sign up for those because they're hungry for change. But what they typically don't do is they typically don't totally blow their budget on that, right? They'll make a sound investment in that with their money, and they won't match that investment with their time or their energy. So essentially what they're doing is they're taking this experience, this working through a course, and they productize it. They say, oh, well, this course is going to do this for me. Your relationship with the material and with your own execution with how you apply what you learn in the course is what's going to allow you to create something, not the course itself. Right. And actually, I mean, that's something I give you a lot of credit for, because you tend to be very good at following through on a lot of those things. Were you saying before that you had like a backlog of those?
At this point, I think I am caught up except for one. I am in the last phase of, and so I just need to finish it. And then I have the current one that I started a little bit, but I have not spent enough time working through it.
Right. I give you a lot of credit for that, because that in itself is a skill, where I call it the distinction of wanting to be led versus waiting to be led. And most people who begin a course or begin something that's going to improve their lives, they're waiting to be led. They're waiting for the system or the course or the information to lead them somewhere. And then there are people who are, instead of waiting, they're finding leadership wherever they can, especially when that comes from within. So you buy a course and you say, you know what, even if the Facebook group that goes along with this turns into total crap, even if I don't get any support from that group or from whoever's supposed to support me as a part of this, I'm going to find a way to make this work. I'm going to find a way to create value out of this.
It's funny. I just remembered I started another course. That one's different though. Well, because it's an exercise course. So I consider that different than the other courses. And it's supposed to be done 6 days a week. That isn't happening. And I knew that going in. So I do it on my schedule. And I know it's going to take me longer. And that's okay. Like, I finished the first 2 days. It's been a week, and that's about on schedule for me. And I've already watched the next lesson, and then I'll go do it. So yeah, I am good about that. I might not be the fastest, but I will keep going.
Yeah. And I give you a lot of credit for that, because that sort of follow through is not common.
And that was a blind spot for me. It took me forever to understand that people just don't do stuff, because I'm the kind of person who gets stuff done. And so I just thought everyone else did too.
Yeah.
And I found out that 97% of people don't.
No, you're definitely well beyond the top 3% in as far as devoting your time and your energy to your own development. You're in like the 0.01%.
I don't know about that, but I keep trying. I keep showing up, and I keep working at it.
That's how you create the path, man. They say the road is made by walking.
It is. And it's a struggle, and you don't always want to do it. But life is that journey and that struggle. And I think learning to embrace the struggle and just keep showing up, keep doing the work, and you will continually, little by little, baby step by baby step, get better and better and closer to where you want to be.
Yeah. 1% a day. After a month, that starts to look exponential.
A 1% a day, 100 days is 100%.
Yeah. 1% a day will create a J curve for you. You will accumulate critical mass. In 100 days or in a year, you will accumulate critical mass. That's a guarantee.
That's what I think I tell people. You don't need 1% a day. How about 1/3% a day, or slightly even less than 1/3% a day? Because if you can do less than 1/3% a day, in a year, you will have 100%.
Yeah.
And so you just keep showing up and you just a little bit. And over time, dramatic differences come.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And it's beautiful, man. It is beautiful.
It is. It is. So just because we like to talk about money, do you find your clients have money scripts that hold them back from the success they want?
Yes. It depends too, because over the last few years, I've taken on a wide range of clients. I see with some clients, there's simply a ceiling of where they're willing to invest in themselves as far as matching their money with their time and energy. And there's a distinction that comes up with people. I call it investment or expense, right? The first way we can create this is how we view the things on which we spend our money. We can say that coaching is an expense or an investment. And if it's an expense, you're going to try to minimize that expense by nature, right? We both are grounded in the principles of accounting. You see an expense, you're going to try to get that as low as you can to keep as much money in your pocket as you can. And typically, when we do that, we are expecting that thing we've turned into an expense to do a job for us, right? This coach is going to fix this in me. This towel is going to dry me after I get out of the shower, and so on and so forth. Whereas with an investment, it's not just what you're going to get out of it. You acknowledge that there is some effort to be set forth on your part. Maybe there is something beyond what you get. Maybe there is a relationship there. Maybe you acknowledge that there's a possibility if you match your financial investment with your time and energy, that you could come away with something more than you thought you were going to. The other context in which we create investments and expenses is with ourselves. We can choose to see ourselves as a safe investment or a risky investment, which we'll tend to treat much more like an expense. So some clients I've seen see themselves as very risky investments, and they will want to, on a looser basis, say on a month-to-month basis. And if 1 month they don't create the results they'd like to, they say, oh, well, you know what? This thing isn't working. Typically, the question I'll come back with is, hey, okay, did you match your financial investment with your energy and with your time? More often than not, the answer is no. And we'll dig into that, but they're convinced that there's something risky about this, right? There's something risky about the investment they've made in themselves. And for what it's worth, I'm very familiar with this script because it's one that I've had to work through. So I just invested in a new coach, and these same scripts came up for me. This is a meaningful amount of money for me. And as those thoughts of, oh crap, what if this doesn't work, were coming up, I noticed myself catching them and instinctively gravitating toward, what if this doesn't work? No, if I hit a bump in the road, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to create something from this no matter what it takes. And that has been the big shift for me, is acknowledging that I have that agency to create whatever I want in this investment. So I see that in clients. I think that I don't know of many people who don't have a script around money. Sometimes they don't come to the forefront for certain clients as much as they do for others. But I think most people have something around money and around whether it speaks to the value they're contributing to society, or to whether they're a good investment or a risky investment or a good person or whatever.
And I concur. Most of us do. And that's why I think so many people struggle with money. And it's when you learn to have that relationship and fix that relationship, that you can create abundance and life becomes much easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any topics that we should have chatted about that we did not cover yet today?
A lot of the times when I talk about mindset with my clients, I love to break it down into distinctions. And distinction is simply a choice between two ways of doing something or two ways of being in relationships with people or your career or yourself. And I have a pet distinction that I would love to share. Is that cool?
Yeah.
So this pet distinction is ownership or victimhood. And it basically underpins our entire worldview. And just to get this out of the way, because victim and victimhood are buzzwords now, there is nothing about this that's about blame or victim blaming or anything like that. It's what we're talking about are simply stances from which we come from in the world. And the simplest way of saying this is victimhood is that the world happens outside in, right? That the world is happening to you and there's nothing that you can do about it. It reminds me very much of the way we were with money when I was growing up, right? That this is as good as things are going to get and there's not a whole lot we can really do about it. It renders you a passive participant in the game of life. And we mentioned earlier that, the idea that money comes from somewhere else, this is what sets that up, right? The idea that we're helpless and that any money that comes our way is the result of something that happens externally. And it does a funny thing to relationships too, Rocky, because wherever there's a victim, you know what else there has to be?
What's that?
There's got to be a perpetrator. You got a victim, you got to have a perp.
And so we have to blame.
Right. And we start creating blame. Ownership, on the other hand, that is the stance where we'll call it inside out, right? Where the world happens around us and we choose our response to the world, no matter what happens. And it draws you immediately into the present because victimhood can only occur in the past or in the future, right? It can only be in a remembered past or an imagined past or an imagined future. Ownership always happens right here and always happens right now. And there's this freedom that comes along with that. There's no blame, there's no fault, and there is no argument with reality, right? And when I say that, as a victim, it's very easy to throw around should statements. Oh, well, this shouldn't be this way, and this shouldn't be that way. And I would agree with certain things that they're not ideal, right? I would like to see things differently. I would like to see things happening differently in some parts of my life or in some parts of the world. And shoulding all over yourself is the ultimate argument with reality. It's happening. It's not to say that we don't work to change, but acknowledge that that's what's real and keep marching on. So ownership is the vessel through which we march on. We are right here. We are right now. We are in action. And with that, I'm going to get off my ownership victimhood soapbox and return the mic to you.
As a final thing, what's one action step that people can take this week to bring about the change they want in their life?
I'm going to go back to what I suggested before, which is slow down, right? Slow down and notice the place you're coming from. Notice what thoughts are coming up in your mind and notice whether or not you've challenged them. If these are thoughts that are not serving you, it's a stream of negativity, take a moment to challenge it. Where do you really want to be coming from? If you have to sit down with a pad and paper and flesh it out that way, take a few minutes and do it. If you take 5 minutes to do that, to either do it to yourself silently or to do it on a pad and paper or to pop open a Word document on your laptop, those 5 minutes will give you back hours of your day. And there is no force more powerful than hard-earned time kept rather than given away to the demons between our ears.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you so much for sharing it. If people want to get a hold of you, find you, connect, what's the best way for them to learn more?
My website is mikefharris.com. That's F as in Francis. They can find everything I write there, as well as ways to contact me and work with me. And you can also catch me. I only have a personal Facebook page, but people are welcome to connect with me. I'm Mike Harris on Facebook. You will recognize me by the vast breadth of my beard and my profile picture.
Hopefully there's not more than one Mike Harris with the big beard.
I get the feeling there probably is, but and if anyone wants to email me directly, I respond to just about any email I receive. So mike@mikefharris.com.
And thank you for sharing that. It's been a pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Rocky, it has indeed been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the next time we speak.
As am I.
All right. Be well, my friend.
So, what's preventing you from moving forward? And who are you putting on your team to help you build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I help you achieve your goals? Or is it Mike? Or is it someone else? Take ownership of your life and stop wasting time. Take the steps that move you closer to the life you want to live. Is there someone you know who could benefit from what we talked about today? Please share, as it helps to build your social capital, create better relationships, and start better conversations. Remember what Mike said about listening. I know if you share it, the people that you do will appreciate you for it. You can always get me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing, how the information I've shared has helped you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.